What I want to talk about today is really building off the talk that I did last week, which we called Getting to Product Market Fit Part 1, which was also called So I've Got a Great Idea, Now What? We kind of talked about business models and how you can go out into the marketplace and test your concepts and use that to refine and develop a scalable and repeatable business model. Today, it's more about how do you actually do that second part? How do you actually get out of the building and go talk to customers or talk to humans, which is a phrase I'll come back to saying. So the other name for this one is I would call Success Starts with Understanding Your Customers. And that's really what this is all about. It's about getting out of out of the classroom, out of your dorm, out of your apartment, out of your office space, and actually engaging with the marketplace to develop empathy and understanding for them. Okay? So, and a lot of the way that this is done is actually going to be a little counterintuitive, or at least counter to your instincts. And so what I want to do is share with you some tips and tricks and secrets on how to best do this process of customer discovery. Okay. By the way, I'm Frank Rimalovski. I'm the executive director of the Entrepreneurial Institute. I do a little bit of teaching, but mostly what we do here is work directly with entrepreneurs to help them take their ideas or inventions and turn them into startups. So for those of you who don't know, in addition to Startup School, we run a whole array of programs and resources, from personalized coaching to accelerators. We have grant programs. Come on, we have plenty of seats right over here. And a whole host of other stuff that I won't bore you with. A lot of it's detailed on our website, which I encourage you to check out. So, and the real reason why you want to, going back to develop that empathy, I think is actually summarized really well by Joe Gebbia, who's one of the founders of Airbnb. He says you want to go out and talk to people that you're designing for, such that you can understand the world from their point of view in order to inform your point of view, right? Because you might have a great idea or a great product, but if that doesn't meet the needs or solve the problems or address the pain points of your customer, okay, then what's the point, right? We talked last week, for those of you who weren't here, to refresh those of you who were, that actually most startups fail. And the number one reason that they fail is that they built something that not enough or nobody wanted. And we believe that's infinitely preventable. So a really simple way to think about this is learning about how to figure it out what it is that people want before you actually invest all the time and effort to build it. So you actually build something that not that you hope, think, or believe customers want, but that you actually know. Okay, but this doesn't mean going out and just simply asking customers what they want. Okay, what customers want is actually your job as the entrepreneur or product manager. Understanding their needs, though, is something that you can do and that you can ask them. Okay, I call this quote, as I said last week, the curse of Steve Jobs. Okay, because people think that Steve just had divine intervention and invented and created products that he knew the world wanted. But actually Apple and all great entrepreneurs, and Steve in particular, do a lot of research. But it's not the kind of research you're thinking about. It's not about doing surveys or even focus groups. And it's not about reading secondary research. It's the kind of research that he also talks about in this quote, is that new ideas come from watching something, talking to people, experimenting, asking questions, and getting out of the office. Okay, and one thing actually he was kind of famous for was Steve lived in Palo Alto, where the first Apple store was, and he would actually often go into that store, kind of cloaked in a baseball hat and in a hoodie maybe, and observe what questions people were asking and the way they interacted with his products. That's simply one form of primary research, and so we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So just to refresh, we talked about customer development, which is this is the process by which you go out into the marketplace and learn about the needs of your customers. Right? We talked about how startups are in search of answers to those questions. are in search of the answers to the questions of who their customers are and what it is that they value. Big companies can execute, right? Because they're executing against known knowns. Who their customers are, what they value, how much they're willing to pay, where and how and when they like to buy, what's the most efficient way to sell and market to them, and so on. But startups are figuring that all out. So customer development is the process by which we go out and search for the answers to those questions. And we start by defining our hypotheses about this, how we think customers will buy, why we think they will buy, how much we think they're willing to pay, and so on. And then test those assumptions about customers' needs and problems. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. And then you use that to develop minimally viable products, as we talked about, and then put those in front of customers to seek validation that they're actually interested in your solution or problem. But building first and then asking later is actually just like shooting first and aiming later. Okay? So most of you, I'm presuming, are in this stage right now where we're getting ready to test those assumptions about our customers' needs and problems. And remember, we also, and this is kind of the end of the refresher from last week, that your job is not to validate your product. Okay? It's not just to go out and force your product into the marketplace or even to find the best home for it. Right? It's to validate the problem that you believed you were solving in the first place. Okay? Find out who has that problem, maybe who has it most acutely, and then figure out the best way to solve it. And if you talk to successful entrepreneurs, virtually all of them made some pivots and adjustments along the way from their original idea or concept or vision, okay, as they interacted with the marketplace. And what we're trying to get you to do is what is the most efficient and cost-effective way to do that. Okay, and actually, if you're familiar with the term the lean startup, that's really what this is about. But lean is not about saving money. That's actually a happy byproduct of it. It's really about minimizing waste. And as an early stage entrepreneur, you may not even have any money, okay, but the thing you do have is time, and that's what you don't want to waste. Okay, how can you make the best use of your time and whatever resources you do have to increase your likelihood of success? Does that make sense? Okay. So last week we talked about the business model canvas, and the way that we get started working with this, okay, is by filling out our hypotheses about our business model. I'm not going to go through this dimension of, again, there's a lot of great information online, and actually the video from last week will be online shortly. But the business model canvas goes hand in hand with the customer discovery process. So this helps us identify where are the riskiest assumptions inherent in our business model. Okay, and as we talked about, the customer segment and the value proposition, which means who is your initial target customer and what is the problem that you're solving for them, the value you're creating, or why do they care, are really the bedrock for your business. Okay, if you change your customer and or value proposition, everything else in your business model changes. Okay, so step one is to fill that canvas out, but it's not just about filling it out. Okay, it's because most of your assumptions are wrong. And I'm not saying that to be flip, but we actually have data that says that over 60% of your assumptions are wrong based on past experience of working with thousands of other early stage entrepreneurs in universities and accelerators and the like. So the goal here is to figure out how to de-risk your business model the same way that you might think about de-risking your technical or product development efforts. Okay, and for years we've had processes around that. Initially it was waterfall engineering, now it's agile engineering, but this is kind of applying a similar process or methodology to take the risk out of your business model. Okay, so right, we talked about applying the scientific method to business model development, observing those phenomena in the market to formulate or inform your hypotheses, coming up with experiments to test those hypotheses, modifying those hypotheses or pivoting as we talked about, and then establishing theories, and then going and executing on that, okay? In this very early phase, those experiments are customer interviews. And that's what we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about. Okay, and this is going to involve getting out of the building. And that's the number one thing I want you to remember about this talk. Okay, the answers to the questions that you have about your business are not on your whiteboard, they're not on Google, they're not in the classroom, they're not in the Leslie E Lab. They're out there in the marketplace with your customers. And as we'll say, this is going to mean doing in-person, one-on-one interviews with customers, okay? And that could include everything from just simply going to Washington Square Park, identifying your target customers and interviewing them, or it could mean arranging appointments with folks if you're trying to do more of an enterprise thing. Actually, just on that point, so who is thinking about something that is more consumer-focused for their business? Okay, about half of you. And the other half are enterprise-oriented. You're trying to sell to a business or institution or organization like that. A couple of you are enterprise. Okay, maybe 2/3 consumer. Okay. The goal of this is to gain insight and empathy into your customers and your market. Okay, and what we're talking about is not seeking statistical relevance. This is not a statistics exercise. There's going to be no advanced math here. Okay, but we are seeking pattern recognition, and that's something that, as humans, we're all actually programmed to do. We know, we start to identify when we hear and see the same things over and over again. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But you need to do a lot of interviews to identify those patterns, but also to test the different elements of your canvas. Okay, so it might take 20 or 30 interviews just to kind of validate, assuming you are correct or largely correct about your assumptions, to get comfortable that you're on the right path as it relates to your customer segment and value propositions. But then there's all the other elements of the canvas. So when we actually teach this in a classroom or in our accelerator, we have teams do 100, 150, 200 interviews sometimes. And that sounds like a lot, and it is, but it's also very doable. When I teach a 5-day version of this in a class, okay, the teams do anywhere from 30 to 60 interviews in 5 days. Okay, so if you have the rest of the year to get going on your startup and thinking about spreading that out, it's not actually a lot of time, particularly if you're talking about a consumer type business, but then you actually need to elevate the numbers. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, so the first thing that you need to understand is who is it that you want to learn from? Okay, who is your initial target customer? Okay, and we talked a little bit about this last week as well, but startups succeed by initially targeting a small market or a niche. Okay, as a startup, you don't have the resources, financial or human, or the capacity to target the mainstream market. Okay, big companies target the mainstream market. They advertise on TV and on newspaper and have online advertising campaigns, and they're targeting millions of people. Okay, you don't have the financial resources to do that, and besides, you probably are not going to build a product in its first incarnation that has that mainstream appeal. And the example we talked about last week is Facebook, right? When Facebook came out, who was their initial target customer? Harvard students, okay? 10,000 people roughly. Okay, very small market with a very simple application. If you saw the movie The Social Network, remember what they did. It doesn't bear any, or bears barely any resemblance to the product that they offer now. Okay, if they tried to build the product they offer now in a dorm room at Harvard, it never would have happened. Okay, so they had a very narrow value proposition for a very narrow customer segment. And then over time, they built and expanded the customers that they served, right, to all 4-year students and then 2-year colleges and then high school students and today, as I said, your grandmother uses it, but their product offering of what Facebook is and does has grown dramatically. Okay, when I started using Facebook, I guess it was about 8 or 9 years ago now, okay, it wasn't to find out if he or she was single, which was originally the value proposition when Facebook started at Harvard. Okay, it was more about staying in touch with long-lost friends and sharing photos, and today it's more about reading fake news and stuff like that. Okay, thank you for laughing. So who are your Harvard students? Who are those early adopters, those enthusiasts, who your problem, as it is conceived today or in the near future, has that hair-on-fire problem that you can solve for them? Okay? And so we're going to formulate a hypothesis about who that person is and then go talk to them. Okay? But don't worry or stress about picking the wrong customer set or market. Because if you go out and talk to 15 of these people and find out that they don't have that problem or they're more than satisfied with their existing solution, great. Then we pivot and we identify another market. But you haven't built anything. The only thing you've done is waste some time interviewing some people. Low cost, low effort. Okay, as opposed to building a product and then finding out, and launching it and then finding out that you're wrong. Okay? Now, it's really important, even if you're selling into an enterprise, to remember that customers are individuals. Okay, we talked about how institutions, universities, corporations, hospitals don't buy anything. It's the people inside of them that do. So you need to get as specific as you can about who those people are so that you can target them and know exactly who it is that you want to talk to. Okay, so you don't want to go into Washington Square Park and just talk to anybody. Okay, if you were building an app or a web service or something, I want you to get specific. We are targeting 18 to 24-year-old women who live in urban settings. Okay, so you can walk in Washington Square Park. Hopefully it's easy to identify the women. You can guess on their age. And then what's the first question that you want to ask them? Do you live in New York City? No, thank you very much. Yes, oh, do you mind if I ask you a few more questions? Okay, make sure you're not wasting your time talking to someone who's not your target customer. Okay? So, and we'll do an exercise on this after I speak for a little while. So I want you to get really specific about who those people are. Their demographics, their age, their title, their role, where they live, maybe how much money they make. It'll vary for each of you on what's important. But I want you to get as specific as possible so you're focusing your efforts on those people. Okay? If you go out and just talk to random people, then you're going to need to talk to hundreds of people to identify those patterns between them. Okay? Separate the signal from the noise. If 10 people say, yes, they have that problem that you've identified, but they're from all different walks of life, then you don't know who to target. All you know is that there are some people out there who have that problem, but you don't really know which ones. Does that make sense? Okay. The second thing you need to do is then go find those people. Okay, find those very specific people. Okay? And it's really important that you get at least 1 degree of separation away from you. You want to talk to people that you don't know. Okay, it's like in the cartoon, right? If you ask unbiased, candid feedback from your parents, what are they going to tell you? That's a great idea. Or they might tell you, no, just go get a job at Goldman Sachs. Okay? Probably one of those two. You're not really going to get valuable feedback. So you want to talk to people who are not your friends and family. Okay? And you really need to become a LinkedIn power user, particularly if you're going into an enterprise market. If you're looking for purchasing managers at hospitals, even if you work in the medical center, you probably don't know a lot of them. Okay, but you can go into LinkedIn and say, hospital purchasing manager. And boom, you're going to find out that there's 50,000 people with that job title. But now you can find out that, oh, well, actually there's 5 of them who are in my 2nd or 3rd degree network. right? I don't know them, but my friends or colleagues know them. And you're going to use that as a way to target those people and leverage those relationships to get to them. So you need to make referrals happen. Okay? And in fact, if you do get that interview with that hospital purchasing manager, you should ask them, do you know 2 other people like you? Particularly if the interview went well and you validated that they do indeed have the problem that you think you're solving for them. Right? And so they tell 2 friends and so on and so on. And that's how actually you can get to a large number of interview candidates very, very quickly. But you need to get creative. Okay? This is not easy. Sometimes it can be very hard. Some people, if you decide you need to talk to Fortune 50 CEOs, which I would probably advise you against, like these people are going to have a lot of gatekeepers. Their secretaries are going to have secretaries who are going to have executive assistants to make sure that you don't waste their time. Okay, so you're going to need to get creative. We had a team 2 summers ago who had identified, actually it was something at a hospital, radiologists as their target customer. And they were having a really hard time getting these busy physicians to sit down with them. So what did they do? They actually got lab coats and clipboards and hung outside the radiology department and caught the people as they were going off on breaks or for lunch or at the end of the day, and would have a 2 or 3 minute conversation with them to try to get them to agree to maybe a 15 or 20 minute interview at a subsequent date and time. Okay? We had a team a couple years ago that wanted to create, this is when almond milk wasn't really a thing. I'm not even sure if it's a thing now, but they had a twist on almond milk. And so they needed to talk to almond milk. They wanted to talk to almond milk drinkers. So what did they do? What do you think they did? Where did they hang out in the supermarket? Right by the almond milk. And as soon as they saw someone reaching, going, oh, you like almond milk? And they'd ask them a couple questions. Okay? So you have to fish where the fish are, as the expression goes. Okay? It's like, Jesse James, the famous bank robber of the 1800s, was once asked, why do you rob banks? Who knows what he said? That's where the money is. Okay? So follow the money, fish where the fish are, whatever metaphor you like. I'd also recommend you try to catch them in the environment where they're having the problem that you think you're solving for them, or at least where it is most top of mind. Okay, so maybe you can't be at the breakfast table when they're pouring the almond milk on their cereal. Okay, so the supermarket was the next best thing. But where people are having the issues or challenges or needs that you think you're addressing. So if it's a B2B thing, try to capture them in their work environment, because sometimes you can learn things simply by observing in that context. You're not relying completely on their recall. So that's what I mean when do it in the wild. Okay? Also, promise to be brief. Don't ask someone for a 60-minute interview. Okay? Because you're not going to get a lot of yeses. Okay? If you're doing customer intercepts in the supermarket or in the park or something, ask for 3 to 5 minutes. Okay? And if it's going well, they'll give you 2 to 3 times that. Okay? The teams that we work with in our Summer Accelerator, the Summer Launchpad, which are a mixture of consumer and enterprise, use these tactics very successfully. Okay? Enterprise customers that they ask for a 15 to 20-minute interview would often result in 45 to 90-minute interviews if they went really well. Okay? You can't always predict which ones are going to go well, but same thing with the consumer ones. A 3 to 5 minute interview turns into a 15 to 20 to 30-minute interview. Okay? I'm not telling you to lie, but I'm telling you to increase your likelihood of success. It also means you need to optimize what it is that you want to learn during that interview for a 15 to 20 minute or 3 to 5 minute. Okay? So it's not 10 minutes of getting to know you. Okay, you want to start launching into the most relevant questions, and we'll work on creating an interview guide a little bit later on. Okay, remember, as I said, enterprise customers are people, not just institutions. And while you're here at NYU, okay, play the student card. or the researcher card. Okay, it doesn't mean physically showing them your ID, but it does mean telling them that you're a student or a researcher, okay, and you're trying to learn something. If you start out and saying, oh, hi, my name is Frank, I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm working on a new water, and I immediately believe you're trying to sell me something. Okay, but if I come up to you and say, hi, my name's Frank, I'm a student at NYU, and we're trying to learn about people's preferences and priorities in bottled water for a class or for a project. Can I ask you a few questions? It's a very different conversation. Think about those phone calls you get at home, those unsolicited phone calls. You know when they're really trying to sell you something. We all kind of have our spidey sense attuned to this. Okay, so put yourself in the other person's shoes. What are the things that you can say to them to put them at ease that this is not a sales call, but that you actually are there to learn something? Okay? So here's an example of an email that you might send. This is actually through a referral, but this could be adapted otherwise. But it says, John, I'm participating in a program at NYU, and I'm studying how, in this example, how small business owners are handling their expense report management workflows and the frustrations they are experiencing. I see from LinkedIn you know James Smith at Pinto Boats. I understand James has expertise in this area. I am researching and would love to speak with him. Would you be willing to make an introduction to James so that I may have a 15 to 20-minute conversation to ask him a few questions about this? Okay? So if this wasn't through a referral, right, you can just take out that middle sentence and just ask for the interview directly there. Okay? But this puts them at ease. It tells them what it is you want to learn. It's not about your startup or the problem. I mean, you can infer what your solution does, right? That it's about making expense report management workflows less frustrating. Okay, but it's focused on the problem. Okay, and it says that you want to learn. You're not even asking for feedback. You want to ask them questions. Okay? Now, one dimension of this that also I kind of talked to a little bit, right, is your mom was wrong. Okay, you do want to talk to strangers. Okay, we actually want to get and talk to people that we don't know. Right? The people that you know will be nice and tell you what you want to hear. And those interviews can actually be harmful, because they're likely to be full of false positives. Okay, what you need is some radical candor. If you know people who are working in the area that this guy's trying to work on, well, be his friend and introduce him to your friends. And they'll give him the radical candor that he needs. But his friends are going to tell him, I think that's a great idea. Oh, I'd buy that. Okay, and those can be harmful. Only people you don't know, who have no relation to protect, will tell you the truth. And Kramer said it better than I can. Does everyone remember this scene? Right, Jerry and Elaine went to visit their friends who had a new baby. The kid was hideously ugly. And what did they do? They said, oh, what a cute baby, right? Kramer, granted, he's a very unique individual, right? Told them the truth. Not so many words, but more or less he did. Okay? And you need to know. You need the truth. You want the truth. Okay?
So if you have friends that are brutally honest, you can interview them? That's okay?
Maybe. Maybe. Let them interview someone else. Or you can do, actually, I'll mention this again in a bit. You could practice interview with your friends, okay? Just like you could practice interview for a job with someone you already know. But that's so that you get comfortable asking the questions, responding to things, getting the cadence down, okay? But you ignore the data from that. If your friend says, I'll hire you, it wasn't a real interview, then the data is not meaningful, okay? So discard the data, but you can use friends and family for practice interviews, okay? So some other tips on this is actually practice this, okay? You're not going to get 100% yield when you reach out for interviews, okay? So practice, you don't send out the same email to 100 people at the same time and then find out that, well, you really didn't do it quite like Frank said. You did something else, and that yielded a 0 response rate. So try sending an email to 5. See if that works. If it doesn't work, try something a little different. Send a few more. When you see something that works, start using that, okay? Now, for the actual interviews themselves, okay, you don't want to get into a discussion via email. Use email to set up or initiate the interview, okay? But we're also not talking about focus groups, and we're not talking about surveys. Focus groups are good for some things, but not for this. Okay, focus groups result in groupthink, or if you get a very dominant person in a group and everyone else just nodding their head, you think you have 12 people who agree, but they were actually just being polite. Okay, you want to do these one-on-one, and you also don't want to do surveys. Surveys are great when all you want is data. I can do a survey of this room and find out how many male, how many female, undergrad, the questions that Sarah asked you. Okay, we could get that in a survey. But if I want to know why you're here, what you're working on, what's motivating you to come here, that's a conversation. Okay, that's getting insight into you and your interests and motivations. Okay, surveys are not really good for that. Okay? I would also recommend that you don't start with your dream customer. Okay, no more than you would go out to your dream company for your first job interview, right? Because you're going to suck in your first interview. Okay, has everyone here gone on a job interview? Okay, there are some even for an internship, there are some parallels here. It's awkward, particularly the first time you do it. I got my first interviews sucked so bad. Okay, so no more than you would go, and if you want to work at Facebook or you want to work at Goldman Sachs, you wouldn't make that your very first interview. You do some practice ones, do some ones with some other jobs that you're interested in, but it's not your dream job. Same thing with this. Okay, now being an entrepreneur means being aggressive and persistent. And there's a fine line between stalking and persistent. And I want you to have a toe in stalking, but the rest of your foot in persistent. Okay? So that means if someone doesn't respond to you in a few days, it means write them again and say, I just want to make sure this didn't slip between the cracks. I hope we can speak next week. Okay, stalking is writing them every day, calling their office 5 times. Okay, that's not going to likely get a response. If after 2 or 3 tries you don't get a response, you're not going to get one. Okay? But it means being aggressive. It means going to where the fish are. It might mean, sweet talking their personal assistant. It might mean, calling the janitor, or not the janitor, but calling some point of entry to that organization to find out who is the person with that job title, even if you can't get through directly to them. Okay, so maybe you can find a phone number. It means being a little creative and aggressive. Leverage your network. Okay, just like on Facebook, you realize that your friends have friends that you know in common kind of thing. You'll start to understand that in LinkedIn if you're in the enterprise space. That's useful as well. Similarly, just like you can use LinkedIn for business people, you can use Facebook and other social networks to find consumers who might fit the criteria that you're looking for, those friends of friends, and their friends. Okay, also, flattering subjects can work quite well. If I call up Sarah or send Sarah an email and say, hey, I hear you're the smartest person in the industry and I'd love to ask you a few questions, she's going to go, smartest person in the industry? I'd love to speak with you. Okay? You don't have to go that over the top, but a little flattery can go a long way. Okay, so think about how you can creatively flatter people to make you want to talk to them. But be transparent. And when I say that, I mean tell them you want to learn something. Okay? You tell them, I'm not trying to sell you something. This is not a sales call. I don't have a product or service to sell you today. I'm trying to learn something. Okay? But also remember that those initial customer interviews can be your customers tomorrow. So send them a thank you note after you meet with them. Okay? Or ask if you're doing intercepts in the street or in the supermarket, say, this has been really helpful. Could I have your email address so I can send you a thank you note and keep you in touch, or keep in touch on our progress with this project? And then maybe 3 months from now, you can say, remember meeting me in the supermarket that night? Well, we're developing a new product to address the problems that we talked about then. I'd love to, here's a link to our website to learn more. Okay? Or in an enterprise context, that certainly works well too. Okay. So if you know who it is you want to talk to, and now you figured out how to get interviews with them, you got to go in there knowing what it is that you want to learn, and that you're going to make the best use of that time. Okay? And again, that's where the Canvas comes in handy. Okay? So we can sit down with you and help you identify what are your riskiest assumptions. What are the most important things to this business that you have to validate right now, that if they're not true, your business is dead on arrival? Okay, those are your riskiest assumptions. Those are the things you need to better understand. Okay? So identifying, once you understand who it is, turning that into a hypothesis, though, is not as straightforward as it might seem. Okay? And for those of you who remember back to grade school or high school, right, key point of the scientific method is good hypotheses lead to good experimental design. Okay, so you know what it is that you want to test helps inform how you actually construct or conduct the test. And the same is true here. We're going to do an exercise on this in a little bit. Okay, and that becomes critical to properly validate or invalidate those assumptions. And remember, invalidation is good. Okay, to learn that this customer segment is not for me, or that value proposition doesn't resonate with people, well, thank God. You don't have to waste your time on that anymore. You can move on to something else. And all this is key to getting to product market fit. Now, this is where we can help. Okay, because this is where a lot of your instincts may not be that spot on just based on our past experience working with hundreds of other entrepreneurs here. So I'll mention this again at the end, but we would love to sit down with each and every one of you, look at a business model canvas, and help you think about who are the people you should be interviewing, what it is you want to learn from them, and helping you develop an interview guide. Okay? Now, good hypotheses need to be what we call Qrst: quantifiable, relevant, specific, and testable. Okay? Quantifiable because you need to understand not just how that they have a pain, but how severe is it? Okay, and if you could shave off, 1 minute off their day or 1 day off their week, that's a big difference. And understand how much time they're spending on something now. So you want to get as specific as possible. I'll give you an example of this in a minute. It needs to be relevant. Okay, and that kind of goes back to identifying those riskiest hypotheses. Make sure that it is relevant to the specific risk that you're trying to mitigate. Okay, it's easy to come up with 100 questions you want to ask someone. It's really hard to come up with the 3 or 5 most important questions that you need to ask someone. Okay? It needs to be specific to the hypothesis that you're testing, and it needs to be inherently testable. Okay, and I'll give you one example. Is this Qrst, quantifiable, relevant, specific, and testable, that our product will spread through word of mouth? It's relevant, perhaps, if you're trying to test how you're going to market and acquire customers. But it's not quantifiable. It's not very specific. And I would say you'd have a really hard time testing that. So we'll give that a okay. something better would be that our viral coefficient, very specific, over the next 12 months, even more specific, will be greater than 0.5, quantifiable. Okay, and that's something that you can measure. Okay, viral coefficient just meaning how many people tell someone else. Okay? And if you're saying you need it to be over 0.5, then you can actually measure that result by creating an experiment to see that. Now, over 12 months would be a very long experiment, but you get the point.
It just means that 1 out of 200 people pass them out.
No, it would mean that on average, I believe that that half, that they would tell, that every 2 people would tell 1 person. Okay? So it's that kind of specificity that we're talking about. Okay? So that said, that's kind of an advanced kind of hypothesis. I really want you to wrap your head around the kind of things that you can test simply by getting out of the building and talking to people. Okay, and though we do want to be quantifiable, we're not seeking statistical relevance. I don't know who here has taken a stats class. Okay, so that's not going to be all that helpful for this, at this stage. Okay? We also are not simply looking for an N of 1, for those of you who took stats class, okay? We are looking for some pattern recognition within it. And there is an element of you'll know it when you see it, and we'll come back to that point in a second. Okay, but this is also where mentors and coaches can really help you. Help you see, are we seeing signal or noise here? Is this sufficient repeated validation or invalidation? Everyone is case specific. Okay, so I mean, I could tell you that, yes, if you talk to 30 people, that's a good number, but it really depends on what it is you're asking, how uniform that pool of people is, and so on. Okay? At the same token, avoid premature capitulation, meaning just because 2 or 3 people told you something negative doesn't mean that there's no there. Okay? You need to look at the specific people you're talking to and understand the context around that. I'll give you one example. There was a team of students who were working on a SaaS product, and they went out and they were testing pricing. And they talked to 50 customers, and they came back confident that 47 out of 50 were willing to pay $10 a month for their product. And like, that's terrific. What happened to the other 3? And they're like, no. 47 out of 50 are willing to pay $10 a month, $120 a year for this product. Well, that's great. But what did the other 3 say? They said, the other 3, they didn't want a subscription. They just wanted an annual license, and they were going to pay $10,000. Okay? So they were all excited because the majority of the customers said one thing, but do the math in your head. 3 times 10,000 is a lot more than 47 times 120. Okay? So that's one example of maybe where the context is a little specific. Okay? And also, this is maybe one of the most important things, initially, you need to focus on testing the problem. Okay, remember last week I talked about the company with the hemostatic gel? Right? This was a company that developed a gel to stop bleeding. Okay? And it stopped bleeding in 3 seconds. But they were going to go and try to sell this as a first aid solution. But they didn't understand or really think about that in first aid that we use gauze and pressure, and it's universally available. It's essentially free and requires no training. Okay, their product was not free. It was not universally available. Okay, so once they developed understood the context around how bleeding was stopped in medical situations, Okay, they identified that actually first aid was not a market for them, but actually high-risk surgeries where it was really hard to stop bleeding was actually the solution for them. Okay, but they need to get in and talk to a lot of people to understand that context. It may seem obvious to you, it was not obvious to them at the time. So on that note, don't assume you understand the problem. Okay, so first test the problem, then test the solution, as this video will point out.
Thanks for meeting with me today. So I know that you're looking for toys that you can spend more time with your daughter playing. And we designed this great toy that lets you do that. You can play with her and have fun, and you can teach her about building and circuits. What do you think?
Well, actually, that's not the kind of toy I'm looking for. I like toys that she can play with by herself because I'm pretty busy. I don't want to be showing her how to do every single step along the way. I have other things I need to do.
Okay, that's the face I don't want you to make in an interview. That's the face you make when you assume you understand the problem. Okay, she essentially was leading the witness, telling the customer what they thought, what she thought the problem was, and hoping the customer was just going to go, yep. Okay, now she did learn something valuable in that, but a lot of customers won't even offer up what it is that they really want. Okay, so don't lead with the solution. What could she have asked her? Anyone?
What kind of toys are you looking for, or you have a child that's very interested in toys?
Okay, what kind of toys are you looking for? Okay, you could ask her, tell me about a toy you recently purchased. Why did you buy that? How was that experience? How did you choose that toy? How did you learn about that toy? Where did you buy it? You're going to learn a lot more from that kind of interactive, open-ended dialogue than you are going to from, don't you want this? Okay, which is essentially what she was doing. Okay, so Eric Ries, the author of The Lean Startup, has a quote that I love. He said, "The great entrepreneurs fall in love with the problem, not the solution." Okay, don't be a victim of falling in love with your product. Okay, it does more harm than good. All the more reason to not invest too much time in building your product before you've gone out and developed that empathy with your customers and validate in depth the problem itself. Okay, so if now you've gotten the interview and you know what it is that you want to ask or what it is you want to learn, better put, how do you ensure the most effective interview? And don't end up like this guy, right? The first thing is you do not sell. Okay, these interviews are not sales calls. And this is going to be the hardest instinct that you're going to have to fight. Okay, because you've been working on this, even if it's largely up in your head, and you're going to want to tell people about it. Okay, you can do that at the end of the interview if it's gone well and you've validated that in fact they have the problem, and then you can actually test the solution. But it's definitely not the way to start the interview. Okay, so don't plan on doing a demo, don't plan on doing a presentation, and do not plan on talking about your technology or how it works. Okay? You want to get stories, like we were just talking about with the toy, right? Tell me about the last time you bought a toy for your daughter. Okay? And then have a series of follow-up questions to develop depth of understanding about how your customers think and what motivates them. What are their goals? What are their jobs that they're trying to get done, as we talked about it, right? That mom, the job that she wanted to get done was to occupy her daughter so that she could do what she needed to get done. Okay? Don't pass judgment on her, but that's the job that she wants to get done. Okay? How can you help her get that job done? Okay? Also, it's better to be backward-looking than forward-looking. Okay, by that I mean don't ask people to predict their own behavior. Ask them to tell you stories about their actual behavior in the past. Okay, if you ask me on the street, will I buy something? I might say yes, even because if you give me a sample of it because I like it. But in actuality, think about it. You guys have taken samples at supermarkets. How many of those things do you actually end up buying? Even if you liked it. You go, no, that's pretty good. You still don't always buy it. Okay? So you want to understand, how has your customer been solving this problem before? Tell you about experiences, about how they've addressed it. How did they feel? Why did they do that? How much did they spend? All that kind of stuff. Not conjecture about what they may or may not do in the future. So this is not, a multiple choice test. This is a long fill-in-the-blank test. Okay, where actually the questions will change as the interview goes on. Okay? So ask them how they do their job. Ask them about their problems and how they solve them today. Remember, it's about them, and it's not about you, and it's not about your product. Okay? And be that annoying kid who's asking why, and why, and why again. You want to understand their root interests, issues, and motivations. Okay, so if we're talking about buying a toy for your kid, why did you buy that toy?
3 o'clock.
Thank you. If it was because of the price, well, why was the price important to you? Okay, why did you choose that toy? Why did you do this? Why did you do that? You'll get to understand their interests and motivations much better. Now, sometimes people ask about, how do I protect my intellectual property? First, I'll say never sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, and never ask someone to sign one. Because if you're describing your idea or technology in any way, shape, or form, you're doing this process wrong. Okay, if you're going in depth about your technology, okay, I usually say this more for the scientists and engineers in the room, this is a real risk because they often want to do that. They want to have a tech talk. But this is about your customer and their interests and motivations, their needs and behaviors. So focus on the what and the why, not the how. Okay? And don't worry about people stealing your idea. Okay, you should really worry that no one's going to care. Okay, this is Dharmesh Shah, the founder of HubSpot, and I couldn't agree with him more. Okay, there's actually very few examples out there, notwithstanding Facebook and the Winklevoss brothers, of people stealing ideas. And I would even argue in that case, that idea that he took from the Winklevosses wasn't even that good of an idea in and of itself. And it wasn't why Facebook took off. Right? It was when he started posting the status, are you single or not? Are you in a relationship? Is when Facebook really took off. And that was not the Winklevosses' idea. Okay? And besides, Facebook was not the only social network. And in fact, it definitely wasn't the first. Probably before you guys were of age, there was Friendster and Tribe and MySpace and a whole bunch of other ones that failed before that. Okay, so even the Winklevoss' idea wasn't all that original. Okay. Now, you need to be careful about confirmation bias. Who knows what confirmation bias is? It's a fancy way of saying hearing what we want to hear. Okay? So leading the witness would be another way of saying that, or another way of that, where you're seeking the answer that you want, or listening for the answer that you want and ignoring other data. Okay? For that reason, before I cue that point, I want you to do these, when possible, 2-on-1, meaning 2 of you and 1 interview subject. So you can both hear the same thing, because you're going to hear it differently. Okay, well, I'll come back to that point in a sec. It's also important to do it in person. Okay? They say 80% of human communication is nonverbal. Well, when you're talking to someone on the phone, you really have no idea what else they're doing. Are they on Facebook? Are they doing email? Are they looking at pictures of their kids? Are they cleaning up their desk? Or are they deeply engaged and engrossed by what you're saying? Some of that you could pick up verbally, but a lot of it you'll miss. Okay, so you want to see the whites of their eyes. You want to see their pupils dilate. You want to see, are they leaning over and engaged in what you're saying, or are they kind of kick back and disinterested? Okay, you're only going to get that in person. Skype and FaceTime is second best. Okay, phone interviews are third best, and everything else is just a total waste of time. Okay, so I mentioned earlier, get your subjects to tell a story, and if you can do it in person and they have a solution, don't fall into the trap that you don't have competition. If the problem exists, then they're solving it in some way, shape, or form. Learn how they're solving it today. Ask them to show you. That's their solution hack. Okay, there was a startup, it's almost 20 years ago now, that I was working with that was creating a software inventory management system for telephone network operators, so like AT&T and Verizon, who have literally billions of dollars invested in all the invisible infrastructure that helps our phone calls get from A to B, right? Or our data to get from A to B. And these networks, particularly in the late 90s, were growing by leaps and bounds as the internet was taking off. And they used to be able to manage their physical inventory of what switches were where and what versions and all that on paper and then on spreadsheets, but it then started to become unmanageable. But it didn't mean that they didn't have a solution. So when I was talking to one of their competitors and I asked them who their biggest competitor was, they told me Microsoft. And it was Microsoft Excel, because that's what customers were using. They were creating these complicated spreadsheets to manage this, and they were creating a special, purpose-built, very sophisticated software platform. Problem was they all had that solution already. So you had to demonstrate what value you were creating over that existing one, how much money and time you were going to save them. Okay, so understanding that context of the existing solution really matters. Okay, same thing with the hemostatic gel before. You also want to understand their priorities. Is this the number one thing that defines success in their job every day? Or is this something they deal with once in a while, and it's not that big of a deal for them? Okay, the fact that it's a problem is one thing. Is it a high-order pressing problem for them or not? Okay, and also remember, follow your nose and drill down. Okay, you might go in with an interview script, but I don't want you to just follow that road. Okay, when you hear someone talking about something that piques your interest, probe, ask why, and drill down on that subject. Okay? And then listen and shut up. Okay, you should be doing about 5 to 10% of the talking and get them to just go. And that's how a 15-minute scheduled interview gets turned into a 90-minute interview, is when they just start talking. And you'll know by their level of energy and enthusiasm for what they're talking about to know, is this a real issue for them or not? Okay? Now, I talked about this briefly before. I want you to create an interview guide, not a script. Okay, a script is something you follow verbatim. A guide is something you use to lead you that you will pivot from and follow your instincts. Okay? But a guide is still important because it will help you stay organized and stay on point. Make sure that if you only have a short period of time, and maybe you'll only get 15 minutes with this person or 3 minutes with this person, you get the most important questions answered. Okay? It will also help you appeal more professional. You'll look like a researcher. Okay? And help you stay focused on initially getting those customer segment and value proposition. So you should go out, again, depending upon whether it's a consumer or an enterprise type interview, and list, I'd say 3 to 8 questions, depending upon the context, that are the most important things for you to test. So that could include questions like these. Okay, understanding what is their job in the problems, even if it's a consumer. Okay, if we're talking about almond milk again, right? Are you the primary shopper for your family? Do you determine that's their job in this context? Do you determine who buys the milk or almond milk for your family? Okay, that's important. If not, then they're at best an influencer. They're not your end customer. Okay? I'm not going to go through and read all these. I'll put these back up in a few minutes because we're going to have you guys do an interview guide. Yeah?
So it's my understanding that the sample questions you talk about here, they're derived from the business model chart that you create. It's coming from the business model chart that you create first, and then you figure out what the most vulnerable parts of that are.
Correct.
And that's where your hypotheses are drawn from.
Correct.
Okay.
And then use that to inform developing the interview guide to go talk to the target customers that you've identified in that. You just hold on to that. So now, as I mentioned a moment ago, doing 2-on-1 interviews is good for the reason I mentioned before. Different people hear different things, but there's other reasons as well.
Hi, Bernardo. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us today.
Oh, yeah, my
Karina
pleasure.
and I are working on a web service to help teachers build lessons. Can we ask you a few questions about your lesson development?
Sure.
So how do you build lessons today?
Well,
Or not just how you build them, but also how you share them with teachers.
But first, tell us how you do it today.
wait, I'm a little lost here. So what do you want me to respond?
Hi, Bernardo. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us.
No problem.
Karina and I are working on a new web service to help teachers develop lessons. I'm going to primarily ask the questions, and Karina's going to take some notes.
Okay, sounds great.
How do you develop your lessons today?
Well, first I look into all the lessons that teachers have made before, and then I evaluate them. And that's how I make my lessons.
That's great. Karina, is there anything you want to ask about that?
Oh yeah, first I just wanted to confirm one thing that I thought I heard. You said that exporting to PDF is important to you?
Yeah, that's actually really important. That's how we keep all the files in the school.
Oh, great, great.
Yeah, it's really important.
Okay, so it's kind of like taking notes in class is hard if you want to ask a question at the same time. You're thinking about the question, you're trying to listen to what the professor says. Same thing in interviews. Okay, now you can't have 2 of you in class, one of you asking questions and one of you taking notes, but in this case you can. Okay, so it's a good practice to do it, and as we showed in the video, it's don't talk over each other. So assign someone to take notes and write down those key ahas as they happen. Okay? Note the questions that work. Okay, so I would not actually transcribe your interviews, and I would not record them, okay, because you're not going to go back and listen to them. If you do 100 interviews, you're not going to listen to 100 hours worth of interviews. But take notes. Write down the big ideas, the big insights. Put a circle around them. Underline them. Put a star next to them. Okay? And then note the questions that works and use them again. Also, to the extent you're interviewing people with permission, take a picture or video if there's some context to it. Right? Maybe you were interviewing people at their breakfast table. Okay? Maybe there is some context there you want to take pictures of. Ask people if you can, of course, first. But this might help you share some of those insights that might be hard to relate. But also, take those notes, maybe you took them by hand during the interview, and then share them with your co-founders during it so you can capture that shared learning. Particularly if 2 of you are doing an interview together. If you 2 are doing an interview, you're taking notes, she's asking the questions. After, go back and look at the notes together. Okay, will help crystallize your learning. You ever go back and look at your notes after you take them in class, and all of a sudden some things start to make a little bit more sense that in the moment didn't? Same kind of thing. Okay. Finally, speaking of making sense, how do you make sense of what you learn? Okay? So facts are interesting, but facts are easy to get. Insights are our goal. Okay? But as I mentioned earlier, avoid that premature capitulation or jumping to conclusions too quickly. Okay? So don't just scratch the surface. Okay? Don't just find out that someone has the problem. Find out why they have the problem, what they've tried before, and so on. And this is maybe the hardest part, but you want to probe and get those hidden motivations. Understand what's really driving them to do what they do. Ask why and why and why again. And don't worry about being wrong. We will congratulate you when you are wrong, because that's one market or one thing that you know you don't have to waste your time on anymore. Okay? Because depth of understanding is what leads to insight. Now, I've been throwing around this word insight without really defining it. And the dictionary definition of an insight is as follows. An insight to gain an accurate and deep intuitive understanding of a person or thing. That kind of leaves me wanting a little bit. It's accurate, but it doesn't really help. The definition that I like was actually by Mike Krieger, who's one of the founders of Instagram, who said that an insight is something you're so excited about you tell strangers on the train. Right? You ever learn something that you just feel like you have to share with someone? That's an insight. Okay? And if you learn something in an interview that you can't wait to get back to the Leslie E Lab to tell your co-founder about, that's probably an insight. Okay? We know these when we see them, when we hear them, when we feel them. Okay? Remember, the goal of this is to learn. Okay? And to de-risk your business and improve your likelihood of success. We can also help you with that pattern recognition as well. Now, some final thoughts, and then we'll move on to some exercises, is remember to focus on that actual behavior, not on speculative or abstract feelings. If they've created their own solution to it, ask them to see it. If they have that spreadsheet that they're using that your software is going to replace, ask them to see it. Okay? Remember, you should be doing largely listening, with them doing most of the talking. Become that investigative journalist or reporter or detective that you watch on TV and ask those thoughtful, probing questions that get people to open up. Play things back to people to make sure you confirm your understanding. An advanced version of this is harder to do, is if you really want to make sure you're getting something correct, misrepresent it back to them. Okay? If it's not raining outside and I say, and it's raining right now, they're going to go, no, you will get clarity from that. Okay? If you're not sure, that's a good way to do it. Try to leave every interview with at least 1 or 2 introductions to someone else. If these are enterprise, hard to get interviews, ask them to make an introduction for you. Write up your notes ASAP. Okay, don't rely on your memory. Okay, these will start to blur together. There's a lot of things that you're going to learn. Okay, and the half-life of those insights will be surprisingly short. And you won't remember what it is that you even forgot. And avoid premature conclusions. Okay? Remember, your job is not to validate your product. It's to validate the problem and figure out the best way to solve it. And this is not easy. Okay? John Maeda, the former dean of the Rhode Island School of Design, once said that it's grueling listening to customer feedback, and if it isn't, you're probably doing it wrong. Okay? So with that, I want to spend a little bit of time and do some exercises with you. Since most of you were here last week, I was going to actually have you do this customer worksheet again. But in the interest of time, since I took a little longer than I was expected, I want to go straight into developing a customer interview guide. Okay, so I want you to, on the top of this page, identify your customer segment. Okay, so that could be an organization, or it could be a type of person. Okay, so it could be hospitals and purchasing managers, or it could be homeowners, and it could be, you know, moms of small children. However you want to define it. The title, though, is I want you to describe a person as specifically as you can. If you were here last week, try to build on the worksheets that we did last week, where you actually did a whole, everyone who was here remember this worksheet, right? So think back, if you don't have it with you or you don't remember exactly, to that. Okay, so everyone have their customer segment and title and job? All right, now thinking about that, what are your riskiest assumptions about your business? Okay, it could be about who that customer is or some specific characteristics that they have, or it could be about the value proposition and the problem that you're solving for them. So, you know, if I'm wrong about blank, my business is dead. Think about it that way. Okay, so what are your implicit assumptions or hypotheses that you want to test? Okay, now let's shift down to the final box in this is what are the questions, if you had 5 minutes to interview someone, 5 to 10, what are the 3 to 5 questions that you could ask them to help you validate or invalidate those assumptions? All right. So I need a guinea pig who wants to share with the group, and if no one does, then I will just cold call somebody. So any volunteers? All right. So tell us first.
It works.
Tell us first, what's your elevator pitch for what's the business concept? Really,
So
30 seconds or less.
30 seconds. So I'm a professor at NYU. I've always had troubles getting feedback before submitting papers. Usually the first feedback I get is from the journals themselves. I always thought it was too late. So I wanted to create a marketplace for academic peer reviews.
Okay, great. So who is the target customer that you've identified for this?
So
The
those would
segment and the
be-
title.
So those would be academics and researchers.
Academics and researchers.
Yes.
Okay. You weren't here for the first talk, so I would encourage
No.
you to be even more specific as you think about this. So, you know, you're an economist, you said?
That's right.
Okay, so maybe you'd want to start with economists,
Correct, yes.
right?
So
As
it's-
opposed to, you know, biochemists and German literature, et cetera, right? So,
Right.
so you know, not to say that that's the end-all, be-all for your business, but that might be the niche because that's where you have contacts,
That's what I
connections,
know. Mhm.
and you have some greater depth of understanding of the problem. That's a hypothesis worth testing. Okay, so what did you say were the key hypotheses to test?
So the first one was, is getting feedback important before submission?
Okay,
So for me it is. I'm not sure if everybody agrees that they would even be interested in getting feedback from peers.
so if I said yes or
Okay.
no, would that be a sufficient answer for you?
If you said yes, I'd be happy. If you said no, my
Okay.
business is finished.
Well, this is a hypothesis. Okay, and this is not your questions. Okay, what other hypotheses?
The second is that people would be willing to pay to have a report by an anonymous qualified reviewer.
Okay,
So the anonymity here is quite important.
and
the
what's the
question.
third?
The-
Do you have a third hypothesis?
Yes, the third part is not quite related to that person. I was thinking, would you be willing to provide feedback for money?
Okay.
So would anyone be willing to?
So
would
what
that-
were the questions that you came up with?
So the first one is how long do you usually take between an early draft and a submission?
And why?
This-
Okay, that's interesting. Why is that important?
Because if you have just a week, then probably feedback is not that important to you. Maybe it's an indirect way of.
Or maybe there's just not enough time to.
There's not time, yeah.
Okay.
The second one was, how do you usually go about improving your paper during that period of time?
So seeing if they already have a potential solution.
Right, and then I think I was going to repeat the 3 hypotheses. So is getting feedback important?
Now,
before
what's
submission?
wrong with that question? I'll ask the rest of the group. What's wrong with simply asking, is getting feedback important? It's a yes or no question. You really want to stay away from those. You want,
I see.
so say, can you, what's it? So what's a better way he could have framed that?
So I have no idea. I'm just trying to think of what you could say, why is getting feedback important to you?
Okay.
And they'll tell you if it's not. So
You could also ask, can you tell me about a time when you got feedback on a paper? How many people did you ask? Who did you ask? How did you decide to ask them? What kind of credentials did they have? How long did the process take? Right? These are all kind of natural follow-up questions from that first one. But it's again about asking them to tell you more about what they've done in the past as a better predictor of what they're going to do in the future. So what were some of the other questions?
If they would pay to get this service by an anonymous qualified reviewer.
Okay. Again, you're asking them to predict future behavior. So what's another way that you might have been able to reframe that? You could ask them about what is it worth to you? Why would you pursue that feedback? Right? To understand the motivation and maybe how they might ascribe value. You might not just be able to get feedback, but save time in that. You can say, how much time had you invested before in doing it?
I see.
To start to understand, okay, maybe it's hard to put a numeric figure on it, but if you save them 100 hours of chasing down colleagues and all that simply by putting it online and the feedback comes to you, I'm kind of making this up. But, right?
So it's more precise than just a yes and no. You're getting the intensity. And
Yes.
I understand.
All right.
Very
Thank you
good. Thank you for your feedback.
for being our guinea pig. Who else would like to try? Come on, it wasn't that bad. No? All right. So give us your elevator pitch here on what it is that you're doing.
Okay, so I'm combining sensor technology in sports equipment with virtual reality, so you can actually compete in professional sports settings, and then putting that online for esports types of experiences.
Okay.
So my target market are sports enthusiasts, obviously, and primarily amateur athletes who are looking to also train through this technology. So not only have they experience, but be able to train as well. So the key hypotheses that I was testing, one is the willingness to pay, because you have the sensor technology, the virtual reality goggles, which are a separate purchase, but are also very expensive, and then the software itself. So, it's going to run about $1,000 total for the whole package, even though they're buying it separately from different companies. But and then obviously the technological ease of use, whether they're comfortable working with new technology. I didn't have a third hypothesis.
Okay, so what do we think about those first two? What's the challenge with the first question that we asked?
Well, it has to be more specific, obviously.
Well, again, you're asking them to predict their behavior on something that they haven't seen. So you're already jumping right into the solution. Okay, so I'd want to understand what do they do to train today,
Right.
right?
These are my hypotheses. These are what I think. I think they'd be willing to pay. I think they'd be able to use the technology, and then the questions were a little bit different than that.
But kind of, I guess where I'm trying to lead you is implicit within that is that they're not satisfied with existing training
Gotcha.
solutions,
Yeah.
right? Or that they want to play e-games, or right. So how can we? Those are implicit but critical. If they're satisfied with training, or they have zero budget for it. Right, so maybe even find out do they have a budget for it might be something. But better understanding, I would like to have seen more questions to help you better unpack the problem, how they address it today.
That was my first question, was how do you interact with sports currently? That was one of the questions. Like how do
Okay, that's better. That's a little vague, but that's better because that's starting to move towards those kind of open-ended questions where they're going to tell you a lot more, and you can ask more probing and follow-up kind of questions.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. All right. So I want to do another exercise here. So I need another volunteer. Sarah, can you bring up 2 chairs over here for me? I need 2 volunteers. You don't have to, only one of you needs to disclose what your idea is. That's all you need to do. Someone, or I'm going to pick you. Come on up. All right, and then why don't you come up too? Have a seat. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to simulate a cold call. Okay, so I'm sorry, what's your name again?
Rachel.
Rachel. Rachel's going to be our expert. And your name again is? Karan. Tell us in 30 seconds or less, who is your initial target customer? Who is Rachel pretending to be?
My initial target customer is any person who is less than age of 50 or around 50 and is a health conscious person.
Okay. So can you pretend to be an under 50 health conscious person?
Sure.
Okay. So I want you to pretend that Rachel is your customer and you're calling her on the phone to try to get her to agree to interview you, to be interviewed by you. Okay? You can ask the first question of the interview and then we'll stop you if we don't stop you before then. So your goal is to get her to take the call. Okay? Now, I want you to be your skeptical self. You're getting a cold call at home and react as you normally might. Okay? At home or at work. Okay? And then we're going to give some real-time feedback on this.
Hi Rachel, I am Karan. I'm a researcher here at NYU and I'm researching on some predictive health technologies. Can I get a few minutes of you? I need to talk to you. I need to take some insights from you.
I'm really busy right now. How is there just a different? What were you wondering about? I don't have a lot of time.
No, it's something about if you're a health conscious person, then you might also get something from me, and basically it's for me to take insights from you. So I'll request you to please give me a few minutes of your busy schedule if you.
How long do you think it'll take?
Just 10 minutes.
10 minutes. 10 minutes is a lot of time for me.
You can hang up at any point.
I probably would hang. I don't know. I'm skeptical. I don't really talk to people on the phone.
Okay. So, okay, let's stop there for a second. So what did he do? Let's start with what did Karan do well? He said he's an NYU student. So that probably calmed you a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, what else did he do well? He was polite. He kind of cut to the chase, you stammered a little bit, but you kind of explained what it is that you want to learn. You didn't explain really why you were doing it. I think maybe if you said it was for a class or a research project, a program I'm working in, just something that makes it sound legitimate as opposed to just random, right? Yes?
Yeah.
What do you think he did well, or what could he have done better?
For me, at least, the directness of jumping right into it was good. There was no hey, how are you today? It was just kind of right into the thing, which threw me off a little bit and made it feel particularly kind of pitchy. That's how sales calls, cold callers who you don't know call, and they just kind of.
Okay, so maybe it's
jump
striking
right
a
into
little
it.
bit of a balance there.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
Not that I can.
So I would say implicitly, one thing you immediately harped on was how long.
Right.
Right, so you could have addressed that before she even asked you. Say, I just want to, say 10 minutes of your time to ask you a few questions. It'll help with my research. Make sense? All right, thanks. Now, they actually did better than they thought. But what other observations or thoughts did folks in the room have about that? Anything? Who wants to say something?
You could have asked, are you a health conscious person? Because then a yes would have got the conversation going.
Okay. So you made some, that's a good point. You made some implicit assumptions about her. That's a fair point. Other things?
It's more like a question: how to incentivize these people to stay on the phone a bit better? Can you
Make them feel good about helping you with your research. I mean, I don't know that you want to, I mean, offering incentives is slippery, not only because it gets expensive, but you can actually bias. I mean, you're an economist, you know this. If you pay someone to give you an answer, it's going to actually impact your answer.
He tried to do that when he said, this could help you as well. By providing research, you're also going to benefit. Maybe you'll learn something in the process. At least that's what I thought I heard.
Yeah, he was trying to do that. It kind of didn't come out all that clearly. The most important thing, so I mean, you actually did well with it, but it's a little awkward. It's a little unnatural. Take away a couple things. One is practice it. Before you actually get and do your first one, practice it on a friend. Think about what you want to say. Maybe write out some talking points. Again, it doesn't necessarily have to be a script, but just kind of a guide to help you. Remember, if it's really important to say how long it's going to take, right? And that your practice told you that, right? Make sure you write, only 5 to 10 minutes or only whatever it is, okay? And, remember, not everyone's going to say yes, and that's okay. Okay, so get used to disappointment. You're going to have a low yield that will get better over time. You will get better over this. You're going to suck a little bit at first. Okay? Now, you might not be doing a lot of cold calling like that. It's probably going to be more through email or intercepting people on the street than just kind of random dialing of people. Okay, but still a lot of the same kind of rules apply about being prepared, doing a little trial and error, learning from that, repeating what works, get used to disappointment, so on.
I always thought he said get used to disappointment. That's what I thought it was in the movie.
Disappointment?
That's what I thought it was, but it makes more sense.
Oh, in the movie? Yes, get used to disappointment. This is from The Princess Bride, for those of you who are not familiar. All right, I want to do one more exercise and then point you at a couple other resources. And then I'll let you on your way. Okay. So how many people do we have? We have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Perfect. Are you with us? Okay, well, then we have 11. Oh, no. Okay, 12. Perfect. All right. If you guys wouldn't mind, I want you to just pair up. Maybe if you can come over here and sit next to Professor Lawrence. I want everyone in the room, if you have on the back of the piece of paper you just had, I want you to write across the top, like right here, okay, about a recent greater than $100 purchase that you made. Okay, now there's no magic to the $100. I just want it to be something that was not an impulse purchase. If you're a billionaire, then make it a $1,000 purchase or a $10,000 purchase. Okay? Something that you bought in the last couple of months that cost more than $100. A considered purchase, if you will. And just write that. You're going to have to give this to someone else, so write it legibly. And just write it across the top of the paper. Just a one-line description. If it was an Apple iPhone 8, or Beats headphones, or a prom dress, whatever it was. All right? Anybody need more time? All right. So now take that piece of paper and swap it with the person next to you. Can everyone read what their partner wrote? Okay? All right. Now what I want you to do is I want you to create a quick interview guide and come up with 3 to 5 questions. Okay, we're going to do a 5-minute interview of each other, and then we're going to swap. Okay? And I want you don't have to use these questions, but these are the kind of questions. I want you to understand why and how this person came to buying this product or service. Okay, so take 2 minutes and write the 3 to 5 questions that you really want to ask this person about why they bought this. And you can use these as a guide or not. All right, so now I'd like each of you to take, scratch that. We're going to do 4-minute interviews. Okay, so I want you to ask, one of you go first, figure that out, and ask your interview questions of that person, but do the things that we talked about. This is a guide, not a script. Follow your instinct, ask why, probe deep, okay? Do that for 4 minutes. I'll stop you, and then we'll do another 4 minutes of the other person interviewing about their purchase. All right? Ready, set, go. Just stay right here. Go. All right. Time. All right. How'd that go? Yeah? Someone tell me about it. Where's the microphone? All right, you got she's got an evil grin on her face. What did he want to buy? Or what did he buy?
It was NYU tuition.
NYU admission?
No, the tuition fees for the semester.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't. So do you want me to what I asked him or what he answered?
Well, no, you don't have to. We don't have time to do a full replay. But I guess tell me what surprised you about that purchase that you learned from him.
Well, his initial, so I asked him about why he decided on NYU, and his initial answer, was about how he was in a relationship and how he come to New York and then decided.
So his motivations were maybe
his
something
motivation
was unexpected.
Yeah, I would say his motivation was something that I wasn't expecting, and then, the conversation, I could pivot it from there,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
And the interesting thing was the other one was an iPhone, and it was also about relationships as well.
Oh, really? So what was her purchase?
An iPhone 7.
An iPhone.
Oh, an iPhone 7, sorry.
I'll speak slowly.
No, that's okay. So what was surprising about that? That sounds like such a conventional purchase.
It was. And the reason was the iPhone 5 died, and she went straight to an iPhone 7. And we're discussing the reasons behind it. And when we really nutted down into it, the feature of the iPhone 7 and iPhone 5 was FaceTime, and it was to communicate with people a long way away. So that was also about a relationship not only with the device, but through the device, other people.
Okay. So overall, so you guys both, sounds like you learned some interesting things. Relationships drive a lot of your purchases, which is, were you guys here last week? Right? So remember we talked about the functional jobs to be done, but also the emotional and social jobs to be done. And it sounds like in both of your cases, maybe some of those social jobs were actually pretty important for you. And so that's actually good because it's sometimes harder to unpack those. So why don't you guys tell me about your interview? It's on.
Okay. So I guess I'll do her purchase, which is an iPhone 8.
An iPhone 8. Okay, lots of iPhones.
Yeah.
And was it for love?
Well, more out of almost necessity. I mean, she's had the same iPhone for 3.5 years now. So the software is coming out of date. Everything is slow. The camera isn't as good as what the cameras on the current iPhone generation can do now. So it was honestly pretty reasonable to buy this iPhone. That's unexpected because normally when I hear people buying iPhones, it's like, oh, well, it's just coming out and I got to buy it now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's usually the case, but this one was more, okay, it's time to move on.
So did you have to come up with new questions based on what you had learned, or were you able to pretty much stick to your guide?
Not necessarily. I was good on the guide. It was more so because of the surprise, I could then follow up on exactly what she was saying, and then we could build a conversation from there. And then once it was coming to a little bit pause, then you can bring back the guide. I brought back the guide, and then it kept going from there.
Okay. And what was he buying, or what did he buy?
The Broadway show ticket for Miss Saigon, right?
Miss Saigon?
Miss Saigon,
Okay.
yeah. And he actually haven't seen the Broadway shows for a long time because I asked him like how often do you see a show? So it's like his friends invited him to do that, and so he went with 3 of his friends, and he thinks the show has good points and bad points, but overall it's a recommendation. And then maybe later he will continue to see more shows. And now I also ask him like, what other shows have you seen before? So it's like other themes. Sorry, what's that?
So just overall, did
Yeah.
anybody's interview go exactly like they expected? No. Okay? And that's really the point, is this is a fairly organic process. It's not just a matter of filling in the boxes or multiple choice. These can go in a lot of different and unexpected directions, and each one will go a little differently. And that's really what I wanted you to take away from this, and try to use these techniques to get in the heads of people. So 2 resources in particular I want you, if you're going to put this into practice, to think about. One is a book called Talking to Humans. It's actually a free book. You can download it online for free. If you really love the printed version, Amazon charges like $11 for it. But there's a PDF or an ebook version if you have an iPad or a MacBook. You can read it online there. And it kind of goes into a lot of what we talked about in greater depth. But it's a really nice short book. It's kind of bathroom reading, in all seriousness. And then those videos that I showed you, not the Kramer one, the other ones, actually came from these customer discovery Lean Launchpad videos that my colleagues at UC Berkeley did. If you follow that link, there's a series of about 25 or so of them, which also do lots of role play that'll be really helpful. So if you remember nothing, just remember entrepreneur.nyu.edu. That's your one-stop shop for all the programs and resources we offer, not just here in the Entrepreneurial Institute, but also across the university.